So I get asked a lot how to cook the perfect steak. That steak needs to be out of the fridge for at least half an hour before you cook the steak. This is going to give you a much more even cooking. The other thing is that that steak needs to rest for as long as it was in the pan. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do with our lovely steaks that have been sat out of the fridge for a long time, plenty of salt and pepper. You're seasoning that whole piece of meat, not just a little piece of it. So I'm going to create a little salt and pepper bath for that steak. We're cooking two steaks. We're cooking a sirloin on the bone. There's a bone running down there and across the back. Really nice to keep that steak on the bone. Use that salt and pepper and just rub it in really nicely like that. And we're cooking a ribeye. So it's nice to see two different steaks cooked. A bit different. Just get that salt and pepper rubbed in really nicely all the way around. That really is going to impart a lot of flavour as you cook the steak. Then we need a pan that is robust, can hold heat. You need standover cooking time. You need a big heavy pan. It could be a frying pan, but it needs to be a big heavy pan. No point using a very light, thin pan to cook a steak like that. We're going to go in with, I use olive oil, plenty of that, because that basically is the contact between the pan and the steak. The steak is seasoned, as we saw. That goes in. In goes the steak. Place the steak in the pan away from you, otherwise the oil will splash back at you. Very important. I've used rock salt, sea salt, and Maldon. I use Maldon a lot. I never really use table salt, that sort of fine granular stuff, and the purity of flavour for me is what that's all about. So that's gone into the pan. There's complete contact with that surface of the steak on the oil into the pan. Very important, there's a layer of oil between the steak and the pan. Then we do one more thing, we just add a press to that as well. So that just helps ensure that there is contact between the steak and the pan at the bottom. So it was a really high heat. Now I've dropped the heat slightly, I've got the temperature I want, and I want to maintain that temperature. I don't want to keep going at that super blasted temperature and caramelize that meat to a point where it's scorched. We don't want that. We need to tick over really nicely. All we're looking for at the moment is to get both sides of that steak super caramelized. That's all we're looking for. We know that the middle of that steak already is at room temperature, so it's already kind of 20 degrees, 22 degrees. So we've only got a little way to bring that up to about 35, 36, where we're perfect medium. That's had about 3 minutes now. Nice crust, turn it over. That's all we're looking for. Pop the lid back on. So that steak's had now another few minutes. We've got fantastic colour on both sides of the steak now. I'm going to add some butter to that pan. Listen, I'm not going to go mad. You're not trying to sort of make a whole butter bath and poach the steak. This is actually really to slow the pan down a little bit, add some moisture, and adding another layer of flavour. Soft, gentle, fat flavour. Bit of rosemary and thyme, things that are appropriate with steak. They're going to go in. I'm going to turn the pan down slightly more. I'm going to add a couple of cloves of garlic. No need to peel them. I'm not going to eat them like that. They're just going to get flavour imparted into the butter that's then going to get basted on top of the steak. Important you don't add too much butter. There's a reason why. I'm going to turn all of that into a sort of vinaigrette at the end as well. And then you can baste the steak, basically. What that means is just tip the pan up to the butter and the fat runs to one side, and then just lift it up with a spoon and put it over the back of the steak. So you're sort of cooking the steak from the top again and using all that lovely, delicious fat to impart even more flavour. That butter does want to go to a sort of light beurre noisette, which basically means it turns into a sort of nut brown butter. That's really important, otherwise the butter will just be greasy. One thing I am going to do with this steak, the rib, I'm going to turn it onto its fat side just to render that fat a little bit so it's a bit more crispy. We've got to a point now where that's had probably been in the pan about 8-9 minutes now. They're both cooked. There's a couple of ways you can tell. The most foolproof way is to take a thermometer, pop it in. You want that just above blood temperature, about 37, 38 degrees. Take it out and let it rest. Or just do lots of it and get used to it. Out comes the steak. This is where the fun starts for me. This is just how I like it. So I'm going to add now some anchovies to that pan and just let those kind of melt into the pan a little bit. And it creates that sort of really umami, salty, it's not fishy, it's an intensity that I love with steak like that, so it's really nice. That goes in. You could do the same thing with sort of grey mustard or that kind of thing, but I like the anchovies. Just pop the anchovies in and let them melt in the same pan. That's really important. Add a little bit of chopped shallot. Now I'm going to add a load of tomato concasse. That goes on top of there, like that. And then we're going to add to that some olive oil now. Give it at least 10 minutes to just relax, soak up all the juices, calm down, and just become really delicious. So what I've done now is use the same pan, and that's really important because you've still got that beautiful beef residual flavour. Lovely stuff in there. Chopped up a few field mushrooms. I put some onion in there as well, bit of butter. Got that garlic, which I used when I was cooking the steak as well. That's going back in. We're just going to cook that down. And what we've got here is just some field mushrooms that we've basically peeled. So we're going to fill these guys and use them as a garnish for our steak. Okay, so we've cooked that field mushroom down with a bit of garlic and some onion in there. Now what we're going to do is just fill that tomato back in. I still want to keep the juices on the plate. And then I'm going to add into that some chopped tarragon. So it's a little bit sauce chasseur, it's a little bit forestier, it's a little bit béarnaise notes, that sort of thing. So it's kind of a nice mix. Take these mushrooms, basically fill them. I'm going to take some breadcrumb on top of that. And we're just going to pop those in the oven. Just let the filled mushroom cook through 10 minutes, and then we can bring the whole thing together. So when we're going to carve that steak, that's the ribeye. What we want is that it's rested enough, so when we carve it on the board, it's not bleeding out on the board and all that flavour's running away. We don't want that. When you're carving a ribeye, there is a piece of fat that runs this way. What you don't want to do is carve that way, so you basically end up with a big piece of fat there and it won't carve properly. So you need to turn it the other way and then basically carve through relatively thin slices, not too thin. Nice sharp knife, nice sharp long knife. I don't use a serrated knife to carve meat. That's wrong. Just carve through like that, and you see how you're getting that more even fat when you carve through that way. And then, really importantly, what we do now is we put that meat back into this pan here with all those lovely juices, and it's almost like a sort of seasoning tray, if you like. So that goes back in there like that, and then we turn it over, and that's really lovely and glazed and seasoned from that tray. Really beautiful. And that's just imparting loads and loads of flavour into there. And of course, we've only seasoned the outside. It's really important that we do season the inside too. And then just a little bit of new sea salt on the top. And that's that lovely filled mushroom. So this is a sirloin on the bone. So what we need to do now is take that off the bone. Not as complicated as it sounds. We run the knife down that rib bone there, really tight to the bone, all the way to the bottom, over the top, and across, and up again. There you go, that comes off. We'll keep that bone for later. So there you go. I hope that's helpful. That is how I cook my ribeye and my sirloin on the bone. I hope there's little pockets of information in there you can take and go through it. But most importantly, get that steak out of the fridge for at least 20 minutes before you cook it. Rest it for a long time at the other end and use all those pan juices to season and rehydrate that meat. Enjoy.